Part 1 of Silly Verses, Selections from Shores, Carroll, Lear, and Gilbert. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. Silly Verses, Selections from Shores, Carroll, Lear, and Gilbert by Various. Part 1. Gay gods and merry mortals. Humorous verses about Actaeon, Adonis, Proserpina, Anaxarete, Penelope, Sappho, Syrinix, Tithonus, Ariadne, Io, Dido, and Daphne, 1910, by Robert J. Shores. Proem. Some ancient tales of pagan days the author of this book relates, explaining how in divers ways the gods displayed their human traits, and how they oft in other years set human beings by the ears. Belike these rhymes recall to you the jingles of the poet Sax. The poet here is Saxon too, and so must needs relate his facts in such a way that they are clear and suited to the Saxon ear. Some anecdotes which Homer told you'll miss in this, but, reader, pray, consider what was good of old would never pass the mails to-day, and hence this history belated has been, well, slightly expurgated. Actaeon. He saw her charming, but he saw not half the charms her downcast modesty concealed. Thomson. Actaeon with the winding horn pursued the chase in ardent youth, and what he wore when he was born, and little else to tell the truth. For in those days of which I speak they just changed sandals once a week, and as he wandered from the path, chanced on Diana in her bath. All trembling like a startled fawn, up started then the goddess chaste, sprang from the pool the bank upon, and donned her crescent in great haste. For, to her credit be it said, she did wear something on her head. Then the conventions satisfied, gazed on Actaeon haughty-eyed. Actaeon tumbled in a trice that he had got himself in Dutch, but thought, if quite polite and nice, she would not mind the thing so much. So the poor fool, in this fond hope, said, "Tell me, did you use Pear's soap?" Diana, vexed to hear the gag, forthwith made Actaeon a stag. The moral is, if you should chance upon a lady in the nude, remember this sad circumstance, for she'll get even if you're rude, and conversation, if uncouth, may cost you dear in naked truth. Adonis. Dan Cupid with a broken shaft had bent his grandad Jove quite double, and then to cap the climax laughed, and so he found himself in trouble. Up on that august lap was yanked, and thoroughly and soundly spanked, till Cupid, saddened, sobered sore, wished that his wings had sprouted lower. Dan Cupid then in rage and grief straightway set out to find his mother, who stitched upon her evening leaf (she swore she didn't have another, or if she had she still would swear she had none that was fit to wear), and so the naughty youngster found her, with leaves and sewing girls around her. When Venus heard her infant's wail, in apprehension she besought him to tell her all his angry tale. Then to her breast she, breathless, caught him, and as his tear-stained face she kissed, upon an arrow scratched her wrist. So in her veins, in this strange fashion, was introduced the germ of passion. Indignant at the godlet's tale, she hastened to protest to Zeus. Her lovely cheek with anger pale, she was prepared to raise the deuce. But as Olympus' mount drew near, she spied Adonis chasing deer, and in a moment from her head all thoughts of wrath and Cupid fled. Straightway she hitched her gentle team of doves, and left her carriage standing. For this fair youth to her doth seem a hero, comely and commanding, although in fact and eke in truth he was a simple country youth. And so it happened that the Queen of Beauty found him shy and green. Now Venus, veteran at the game of flirting, would not be denied. As goddesses can feel no shame, she soon was anchored to his side. Do what he would, he could not shake her. Go where he would, he had to take her, until one morn upon the plain she found the fair Adonis slain. This story should a warning be to maidens bold who wish to woo, for if you seek your lover, he most certainly will not seek you. All men may love, but just the same they would be hunters, not the game. Adonis, so the story saith, was really simply bored to death. Proserpina. Forth reaching to the fruit, she plucked, she eat. Earth felt the wound, and nature from her seat, sighing through all her works, gave signs of woe that all was lost. Milton. On Aetna's isle Pluto drove his devil wagon one fine day, and passing through fair Inna's grove beheld Proserpina at play. He asked, "Will you not take a ride?" "You're very kind," the maid replied, and stepped into his turnout swell, and that was how she went to hell. For Pluto, whipping up his team, sped on toward Tartarus in mirth, and when opposed by Sion's stream, he took a short cut through the earth, nor paused, nor drew his rein before he heard Cerberus' welcome roar, and sniffed the smell of singeing soul, by which he knew he'd reached his goal. Ceres, Proserpina's mamma, was most amazed with grief and fear. As to Proserpina's papa, his name I never chanced to hear. She cursed for all that she was worth the crops and fruits of Mother Earth. "You'll bear no fruit," she told the ground, "until my Prosy has been found." Jove, who beheld the farmer's need, and saw the season's crops all fail, said, "This is serious indeed, that fellow Dis should be in jail." "I think," said Juno, "'twere as well, it does no good to give him hell." And so it might have been decreed, but for one small pomegranate seed. In Hades, Ceres' daughter sweet was offered luscious bread and jam, but she was much too cross to eat, and even scorned the devilled ham, until at last she made a slip and swallowed a pomegranate pip. Now they who eat in hell, alack, to earth may never more come back. The moral is, don't take a chance joy riding with a strange chauffeur. Remember this sad circumstance, or you will get in trouble sure. If you must go, don't go alone. The devil hates a chaperone. So mind the pips and look alive. Pluto often goes to drive. Anaxarete. In Cyprus dwelt a Nazarete, a maiden famous for her beauty, with disposition far from sweet, who looked on flirting as a duty. 'Tis said she scarcely would despise at slaves and such, to roll her eyes, till most the men of Cyprus were in love, or half in love with her. Young Iphis was a worthy lad, and born of parents poor but proud. He was a credit to his dad, until one day while in a crowd he chanced a college chum to meet, out walking with a Nazarete. And when she rolled her lovely eyes, poor Iphis gasped in glad surprise. One glance, and Iphis was her slave, all other interests he forgot to eat, forgot to shave, and wrote in rhyme a deal of rot, to prove his heart was at the feet of stony cold Anaxarete, who met his protest and his tears with cutting jests and crushing sneers. For Anna, as do all coquettes, so soon grew weary of his wooing, and Iphis took to cigarettes, but still she answered, "Nothing doing." and added, insult ne'er forgotten, she thought his poetry was rotten, and finally, to fix his place, she slammed the door in Iphis' face. When Iphis saw that all was past, and knew that he could call no more, he took a rope and made it fast, and hanged himself before her door. And when his funeral passed her place, she thought to mock his pallid face, but Venus, leaning from her throne, had seen, and turned the maid to stone. At Salamis, her statue still points to the moral of this tale, that any maid who flirts to kill is really quite beyond the pale. And as for lovers, let me say, if she is bored, just go away. No gentleman, and this I know, will hang about when he's a de trop. Penelope. Good nature and good sense must ever join. To err is human, to forgive divine. Pope. Penelope, a Spartan maid, the brave Ulysses wooed and wed. She in a modest blush arrayed, he with a crown upon his head. Two hearts that beat as one, no tear bedimmed their bliss for one whole year. At Ithaca they dwelt in peace, not Ithaca, New York, but Greece. Alas, scarce had been born their boy, an infant very fair and bright, when came a horrid war in Troy, and Papa had to go and fight. He left Penelope in tears, he went and stayed for years and years, and while away, I am afraid, he sometimes wooed another maid. In many lands he dwelt as guest of ladies of exceeding beauty. Ulysses, it must be confessed, in flirting quite forgot his duty. He flirted here, he flirted there, in fact, he flirted everywhere, with Calypso, Nausicaa, Circe, and he a man of family, mercy. Penelope, dissolved in tears, bewailed her spouse, the faithless Turk, and stood off suitors 20 years by doing endless fancy work. By day she made her stitches right, but pulled them out again by night, until her husband, tired of larks, came home and slew that bunch of sparks. The husband, even though he err and lead abroad a lively life, dislikes, when he comes back to her, to find that others woo his wife. Ulysses lacked in morals, true, but she had quite enough for two. May Eros grant a wife to me as patient as Penelope. Sappho. Sappho was pretty, all agree. Some say that she was stately. You cannot prove it, though, by me. I haven't seen her lately. In fact, I do not now recall I ever saw the girl at all. So we must take Dame Rumor's word that Sappho was indeed a bird. Now Sappho in her younger years was wooed by men a-plenty, and setting suitors by the ears amused her much at 20. She swore she'd not at 25 accept the nicest man alive, and laughed to scorn the ardent Greek who sought to kiss her damask cheek. But Sappho finds, as years roll on, as oft a maid discovers, that when a maiden's youth is gone, gone also are her lovers. No suitor hangs about her door to wait her coming, as of yore, and what is worse than all above, just at this stage she falls in love. Just what she does, if tales are truth, fie on that rascal Cupid, is to select a verdant youth, a handsome boy, but stupid. She tries her best to win his heart with all her once unfailing art, but finds, Eros, think of that, that Phaon thinks her old and fat. Poor Sappho keenly feels the shame of love quite unrequited, and though she knows herself to blame, she feels her life is blighted. And so when someone tells her if she will jump off a handy cliff, 'twill cure her of her love and dumps, she rushes out, she jumps. Ah, reader, let us pause right here to drop a tiny, briny tear. Alas, alack, oh woeful sight! It cured her of her love, all right. Fair maidens, heed this circumstance. Don't jump off cliffs, jump at your chance. Syrinx. Poor nymph, poor Pan, how he did weep to find Naught but a lovely sighing of the wind Along the reedy stream, a half heard strain Full of sweet desolation, balmy pain. Keats. In Greece there dwelt in days gone by A maiden huntress passing fair, Who lived beneath the open sky, And dearly loved the open air. Although it really seems a shame To call a lady such a name, This lovely nymph was called, methinks, Syrinx. Syrinx. Syrinx, while following the chase, Was seen one day by ardent Pan, A god of most repulsive face, A sort of burlesque on a man. If we can trust what ancients wrote, Poor Pan was really half a goat. Not like the Peter Pan today, The Mrs. Chase and Adam's play. When Pan began swift to pursue, The maiden in her terror fled. I cannot blame her much, can you? And ran till she was almost dead. But friendly spirits in a stream Had heard and understood her scream, And they had changed her in a wink To reeds upon the river's brink. The god, though thwarted in his scheme To win the nymph, was not dismayed. He plucked the reeds beside the stream, And from them a syrinx he made. The shepherd's pipes, so came to man The music of the pipes of Pan. The moral? There is none, you see. Pan was, as poets all agree, A most immoral deity. Tithonus. Tithonus, royal prince of Troy, All mortal maidens' beauty scorning, Chose for his love, presumptuous boy, Aurora, goddess of the morning. To her he wrote his royal rhymes, For her he saved his royal dimes. So well indeed he played his part, He won at last the goddess' heart. Aurora, wise as gods must be, Was well aware that all men perish, And knowing this, she bent the knee. What won't we do for those we cherish? And thus she prayed to Jove on high, "Oh, please don't let Tithonus die!" And this, the whole of her endeavor, That Tithie dear might live forever. Now Jove, although a deity, Was very fond of mortal ladies, And more than once he, even he, Had grieved to see them go to Hades. "I quite agree with you," he said, "Tithonus would be dull if dead. So be content, I, even I, Decree Tithonus shall not die." Aurora, full of love and joy, Laughed out in Pluto's face of gloom, And hastened off to tell her boy That she had saved him from the tomb. But ah, how foolish to forget One other evil to be met! 'Tis sad to say, but must be told, She quite forgot he might grow old. Grow old he did, as most men do, Grew gray and bald and round of tummy, Grew deaf, grew cross and crabbed too, Grew bent and wrinkled like a mummy. "Oh, gee! Oh, fudge! My sakes, good lands! What's this I've got upon my hands?" Aurora cried, nor gave a hang Who heard her use such vulgar slang. "Alas!" she cried, "is it decreed, And it is even right and proper, That I forevermore should feed A foolish, mulish, old grasshopper?" Tithonus hopped, for you must know That what a goddess says is so. Tithonus, stricken but resigned, Hopped out of sight and out of mind. The moral is, that age and youth Have aye been illy yoked together, For love cannot survive, in truth, A prolonged spell of wintry weather. So when you hear your lady sigh, "Alas! my love will never die," Just heed Aurora's hint, I say, And hope no more, but hop away. Ariadne. Fool, not to know that love endures no tie, and Jove but laughs at lovers' perjury. Dryden. The Minotaur, a horrid beast, which made its food of maidens fair and handsome youths, to say the least had given Athens quite a scare, since Athens sent each year to Crete a batch of folks for him to eat, till on King Minos Athens soured, for no one likes to be devoured. Just as the folks of Athens had prepared to risk their all in war, young Theseus, to the king his dad, proffered his services and swore that he would go to Crete and slay the Minotaur without delay, and so with helmet, box, and grip he started on the fateful trip. Now Minos had a daughter fair, who was humane as well as Cretan, and all in all she did not care to see the handsome stranger eaten. So she resolved that she would aid young Theseus in his escapade, although she knew her royal dad would certainly be hopping mad. The Minotaur King Minos kept within a sort of mystic maze, and in those corridors, unswept, a man might wander, lost, for days. And Ariadne's scheme, in fine, was just to take a ball of twine, and let the youth unroll the thing, and so be guided by the string. All went as planned. O lucky star! The sword of Theseus soon was wet, and slaughtered was the Minotaur. The king had lost his gruesome pet. The lovers fled the monarch's wrath, but even on the homeward path the hero, bored to hear her weep, on Noxus left her fast asleep. The moral is, you should not string young men unless you know them well, for love is an uncertain thing, and strange young men, however swell, if loosely tied and quickly bored, will quit you of their own accord. Io. Io and Jove were holding hands one day beside a sylvan stream, and drawing hearts upon the sands, epitome of love's young dream. Fair Io murmured, "On my life, why took you Juno for your wife?" The ox-eyed Juno, in good sooth, Peroxide would be nearer truth. "Tut, tut," said Jove, "you should not speak so slightingly of my good spouse. She has been busy all this week upon Olympus cleaning house, and while she sweeps I've naught to do but stay here making love to you." "She would do well," the maiden replies, "to sweep the dust from out her eyes." Alas for Io, Juno heard her idle words within the hour. Some gossip of a bee or bird repeated them from flower to flower, until 'twas whispered by the leaves at Juno's threshold, "Jove deceives." "Deceived again?" she cried in rage. To see what happened, turn the page. Or, if the printer can find room to print another line on this, I'll state that Juno heard a boom of thunder, which is when gods kiss, and hurried angrily to where she thought to find the erring pair. But reaching there she saw, I vow, no maiden, but a heifer cow. For Jove, grown wise in other years in which he got his just deserts, was ever pricking up his ears to hear the swish of Juno's skirts. So when he heard her on his trail, he made his hat a milking pail, and changed poor Io, trembling now, into the semblance of a cow. But Juno was not quite a fool, and saw at once her husband's trick, and, though appearing calm and cool, resolved to make that heifer sick. "A lovely cow!" cried she, "divine! I cannot rest till it is mine." Jove cleared his throat and smoothed his vest, but had to grant his wife's request. Alas for Io! Juno sent a gadfly which beset her sore, and drove her, which was the intent, from sea to sea and shore to shore. To Egypt and the Barbados, perhaps to Iowa, who knows? The gadfly followed where she went, and stung her to his heart's content. And so it happens even now, although she vainly tries to grab it, the gadfly stings the gentle cow. He keeps it up from force of habit. Dido. Up then, Melpomene, the mournfulest muse of nine, such cause of mourning never hadst afore. Up, grisly ghost, and up, my rueful rhyme. Spenser. On such a night, as Shakespeare once remarked, on such a night as lovers love to spoon, Aeneas in his cockle shell embarked, and left poor Dido weeping 'neath the moon. A palm leaf in her hand, as Shakespeare said, the crown of ancient Carthage on her head. 'Twas thus Aeneas jilted the fair dame, and put the chivalry of Greece to shame. Fair Dido, to go back a little way, had fled the vengeance of her brother's ire, who slew her wealthy husband one fine day, and chased his widowed sister out of Tyre. Pygmalion was the name he bore at court, though Dido always called him Pig for short. Methinks the greedy nature of the youth made Dido's nickname fit him well in truth. Arriving then on Afric's sunny shore, with some few friends who followed in her train, she built herself some houses and a store, laid out a street and called it Lover's Lane. And since the town was hers, none could gainsay her right to royal rule and social sway. And so it is quite easy to be seen how, when Aeneas came, he found her queen. Aeneas and some refugees from Troy were wandering about uncharted seas. Aeneas had a cold, unlucky boy. 'Twould wring your heart to hear his mournful sneeze. In fact, they all were troubled as to nose, clad as they were in lightest marching clothes. So when they came at last to Dido's land, they were a sick and sorry-looking band. "Not unacquainted with distress," she said, "I've learned to succour all the down and out." Straightway she had them all tucked into bed, and caused her heralds in the street to shout, "Queen Dido seeks a sovereign cure for chills. Bring mustard plasters, poultice, and pills. The victor she'll reward, and make his name a synonym for fortune and for fame." As always, when incentive is supplied, some pharmacist got busy on the spot, made little pills with quinine stuffed inside. She made him rich, but famous he is not. We take them now, but who is there can tell The doctor who first served mankind so well? But let us haste, the yarn, beyond all doubt, Grows dull apace, and slow, and long drawn out. To cut it short, she loved him, he loved her. He stuck around, she made him quite at home. The two were quite domestic, I infer, until Aeneas took a boat for Rome. Rome wasn't there, but what cared he for that? Most any town will do to dodge a flat. Aeneas felt that he could love that spot where'er it be, so be Dido was not. Dido, deserted, built a funeral pyre, on which she mounted with a wicked knife. She bade a servant set the thing afire, and with the dagger put an end to life. So perished Dido, died, oh, died for love. So Dido died, as I have said above. Sweet Dido, loveliest lady of the land, on such a night, a palm leaf in her hand. The moral? This is not a moral tale. What do we learn from it? Well, I should say we learn that merry widows sometimes fail, and cutting Didos doesn't always pay. Daphne. Fair Daphne was a modest miss, a convert of the kiss-not fad, who swore no man should know her kiss, unless it be her dear old dad. E'en as a taught it caused her grief to play at drop the handkerchief. She called each youthful suitor brute, who offered her a chaste salute. In vain her father bade her wed, in vain he urged, in vain entreated. She only shook her pretty head, and all his arguments defeated.
Talk not of men, she said to me, Diana's priestess I would be, and range the woods, heart free, foot loose, to kill the chipmunk and the moose. Ah, well, he sighed, it is a shame, and rather mars this graceful verse, I cannot rhyme his beastly name. Ah, well, perhaps you might do worse. I longed for grandsons, but a sigh, the cost of living sure is high. I'm tired of fish and long for liver. Her pa, Peneus, was a river. And so it happened Daphne did devote her days unto the chase. Whenever she saw a man, she hid, nor would she show her pretty face to any man except her father. A modest little maiden, rather. So modest she would not flirt her dainty little hunting skirt. Though best laid plans of mice and men may go astray, no mouse, no man can hope to bring the wit in play that e'en the dullest godling can. For gods beat human folks all hollow, especially the god Apollo. Apollo, who was far from stupid, had heard of Daphne from Dan Cupid, and he resolved that he would see how true young Cupid's tale might be. He laid in wait and spied the maid, who tripped along the woodland path, in haste and somewhat disarrayed, intent upon her evening bath, not dreaming that a soul was near, until upon her startled ear there broke a single love-lorn sigh, which warned her that the god was nigh. Then like a startled fawn she fled, the grass scarce bending 'neath her feet, her hair outstreaming from her head, her face as pale as any sheet. And as she fled the god pursued, a most ungentle act and rude, and gained and gained and gained so fast, she thought her breath must fail at last. "Help, help!" she cried, "Peneus, aid your daughter, save, oh save me now! So weary and so sore afraid," and in a moment on her brow some tiny twigs began to grow, her feet took root, for you must know her father by divine decree transformed his daughter to a tree. "Ah!" cried Apollo, "what is this? My tree, you can't escape me now." Upon her trunk he pressed a kiss. Poor Daphne blushed in every bough. "You have," said he, "a lovely limb." Say, honest, I'm ashamed of him. How sad to see a perfect lady become a character so shady. The moral is, be careful how you dress when you go out to swim. Poor Daphne might be hunting now, instead of wearing trunks for him.
End of Part 1. Part 2 of Silly Verses, Selections from Shores, Carroll, Lear, and Gilbert. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Silly Verses, Selections from Shores, Carroll, Lear, and Gilbert by Various. Part 2, Lewis Carroll. Father William, The Hunting of the Snark, Jabberwocky, Ways and Means, Humpty Dumpty's Recitation, Some Hallucinations, The Walrus and the Carpenter. Father William. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white. And yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think, at your age, it is right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain. But now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again." "You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat. Yet you turned a back somersault in at the door. Pray, what is the reason of that?" "In my youth," said the sage, as he shook his grey locks, "I kept all my limbs very supple. By the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box, allow me to sell you a couple." "You are old," said the youth, "and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it?"
"In my youth," said his father, "I took to the law, and argued each case with my wife. And the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life." "You are old," said the youth. "One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever. Yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever?" "I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough," said his father. "Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs." The Hunting of the Snark. Come listen, my men, while I tell you again the 5 unmistakable marks by which you may know, wheresoever you go, the warranted genuine Snarks. Let us take them in order. The first is the taste, which is meagre and hollow, but crisp, like a coat that is rather too tight in the waist, with a flavour of will-o'-the-wisp. Its habit of getting up late, you'll agree, that it carries too far when I say that it frequently breakfasts at 5 o'clock tea, and dines on the following day. The fourth is its fondness for bathing machines, which it constantly carries about, and believes that they add to the beauty of scenes, a sentiment open to doubt. The fifth is ambition. It next will be right to describe each particular batch, distinguishing those that have feathers and bite from those that have whiskers and scratch. For, although common Snarks do no manner of harm, yet I feel it my duty to say, some are boojums. The bellman broke off in alarm, for the baker had fainted away. They rouse him with muffins, they rouse him with ice, they rouse him with mustard and cress, they rouse him with jam and judicious advice, they set him conundrums to guess. When at length he sat up and was able to speak, his sad story he offered to tell, and the bellman cried, "Silence! Not even a shriek!" and excitedly tingled his bell. There was silence supreme, not a shriek, not a scream, scarcely even a howl or a groan, as the man they called Ho told his story of woe in an antediluvian tone. My father and mother were honest though poor. "Skip all that!" cried the bellman in haste. "If it once becomes dark, there's no chance of a Snark. We have hardly a minute to waste." "I skip 40 years," said the baker in tears, "and proceed without further remark to the day when you took me aboard of your ship to help you in hunting the Snark. A dear uncle of mine, after whom I was named, remarked when I bade him farewell—" "Oh, skip your dear uncle!" the bellman exclaimed, as he angrily tingled his bell. "He remarked to me then," said the mildest of men, "if your Snark be a Snark, that is right. Fetch it home by all means. You may serve it with greens, and it's handy for striking a light. You may seek it with thimbles, and seek it with care. You may hunt it with forks and hope. You may threaten its life with a railway share. You may charm it with smiles and soap. But, oh, beamish nephew, beware of the day, if your Snark be a boojum, for then you will softly and suddenly vanish away, and never be met with again. It is this that oppresses my soul, when I think of my uncle's last words, and my heart is like nothing so much as a bowl brimming over with quivering curds. I engage with the Snark every night after dark in a dreamy delirious fight. I serve it with greens in those shadowy scenes, and I use it for striking a light. But if ever I meet with a boojum, that day, in a moment, of this I am sure, I shall softly and suddenly vanish away, and the notion I cannot endure. Jabberwocky. 'Twas brillig, and the slivy toes did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome rats outcrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the juju bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal's sword in hand, long time the Sappho he sought, so rested he by the tumtum tree, and stood awhile in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous day, callooh, callay, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slivy toes did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Ways and Means. I'll tell thee everything I can, there's little to relate. I saw an aged man a-sitting on a gate. Who are you, aged man, I said, and how is it you live? His answer trickled through my head like water through a sieve. He said, I look for butterflies that sleep among the wheat. I make them into mutton pies and sell them in the street. I sell them unto men, he said, who sail on stormy seas, and that's the way I get my bread, a trifle, if you please. But I was thinking of a plan to dye one's whiskers green, and always use so large a fan that they could not be seen. So, having no reply to give to what the old man said, I cried, Come, tell me how you live, and thumped him on the head. His accents mild took up the tale. He said, I go my ways, and when I find a mountain rill, I set it in a blaze. And thence they make a stuff they call Rowland's Macassar oil, yet 2d. halfpenny is all they give me for my toil. But I was thinking of a way to feed myself on batter, and so go on from day to day, getting a little fatter. I shook him well from side to side until his face was blue. Come, tell me how you live, I cried, and what it is you do. He said, I hunt for haddocks' eyes among the heather bright, and work them into waistcoat buttons in the silent night. And these I do not sell for gold, or coin of silvery shine, but for a copper halfpenny, and that will purchase 9. I sometimes dig for buttered rolls, or set limed twigs for crabs. I sometimes search the grassy knolls for wheels of hansom cabs. And that's the way, he gave a wink, by which I get my wealth, and very gladly will I drink your honour's noble health. I heard him then, for I had just completed my design to keep the Menai Bridge from rust by boiling it in wine. I thanked him much for telling me the way he got his wealth, but chiefly for his wish that he might drink my noble health. And now, if e'er by chance I put my fingers into glue, or madly squeeze a right-hand foot into a left-hand shoe, or if I drop upon my toe a very heavy weight, I weep, for it reminds me so of that old man I used to know, whose look was mild, whose speech was slow, whose hair was whiter than the snow, whose face was very like a crow, with eyes like cinders all aglow, who seemed distracted with his woe, who rocked his body to and fro, and muttered mumblingly and low, as if his mouth were full of dough, who snorted like a buffalo, that summer evening long ago, a-sitting on a gate. Humpty Dumpty's Recitation. In winter, when the fields are white, I sing this song for your delight. In spring, when woods are getting green, I'll try and tell you what I mean. In summer, when the days are long, perhaps you'll understand the song. In autumn, when the leaves are brown, take pen and ink and write it down. I sent a message to the fish. I told them, this is what I wish. The little fishes of the sea, they sent an answer back to me. The little fish's answer was, we cannot do it, sir, because... I sent to them again to say, it will be better to obey. The fishes answered with a grin, why, what a temper you are in! I told them once, I told them twice, they would not listen to advice. I took a kettle large and new, fit for the deed I had to do. My heart went hop, my heart went thump, I filled the kettle at the pump. Then someone came to me and said, "The little fishes are in bed." I said to them, I said it plain, "Then you must wake them up again." I said it very loud and clear, I went and shouted in his ear. But he was very stiff and proud. He said, "You needn't shout so loud." And he was very proud and stiff. He said, "I'll go and wake them if—" I took a corkscrew from the shelf. I went to wake them up myself. And when I found the door was locked, I pulled and pushed and kicked and knocked. And when I found the door was shut, I tried to turn the handle, but— Some Hallucinations. He thought he saw an elephant that practised on a fife. He looked again and found it was a letter from his wife. At length I realize, he said, the bitterness of life. He thought he saw a buffalo upon the chimney-piece. He looked again and found it was his sister's husband's niece. "Unless you leave this house," he said, "I'll send for the police." He thought he saw a rattlesnake that questioned him in Greek. He looked again and found it was the middle of next week. "The one thing I regret," he said, "is that it cannot speak." He thought he saw a banker's clerk descending from the bus. He looked again and found it was a hippopotamus. "If this should stay to dine," he said, "there won't be much for us." He thought he saw an albatross that fluttered round the lamp. He looked again and found it was a penny postage stamp. "You'd best be getting home," he said, "the nights are very damp." He thought he saw a coach and four that stood beside his bed. He looked again and found it was a bear without a head. "Poor thing," he said, "poor silly thing, it's waiting to be fed." He thought he saw a kangaroo that worked a coffee mill. He looked again and found it was a vegetable pill. "Were I to swallow this," he said, "I should be very ill." The Walrus and the Carpenter. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd, because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily, because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. "It's very rude of him," she said, "to come and spoil the fun." The sea was wet as wet could be, the sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead, there were no birds to fly. The Walrus and the Carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If this were only cleared away, they said, it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose, the Walrus said, that they could get it clear? "I doubt it," said the Carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. "Oh, oysters, come and walk with us," the Walrus did beseech, "a pleasant walk, a pleasant talk, along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each." The eldest oyster looked at him, but not a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat, and this was odd, because, you know, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4, and thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The Walrus and the Carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low, and all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. "The time has come," the Walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing-wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." "But wait a bit," the oysters cried, "before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath, and all of us are fat." "No hurry," said the Carpenter. They thanked him much for that. "A loaf of bread," the Walrus said, "is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. Now if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. "After such kindness that would be a dismal thing to do." "The night is fine," the Walrus said, "do you admire the view?" "It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice." The Carpenter said nothing but, "Cut us another slice. I wish you were not quite so deaf, I've had to ask you twice." "It seems a shame," the Walrus said, "to play them such a trick, after we've brought them out so far and made them trot so quick." The Carpenter said nothing, but the butter spread too thick. "I weep for you," the Walrus said, "I deeply sympathize." With sobs and tears he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket-handkerchief before his streaming eyes. "Oh, oysters," said the Carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But answer came there none. And this was scarcely odd because they'd eaten every one. End of Part 2. Part 3 of Silly Verses, selections from Shores, Carroll, Lear, and Gilbert. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Silly Verses, selections from Shores, Carroll, Lear, and Gilbert by Various. Part 3, Edward Lear. The Ahkond of Swat, the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, the Jumbles, the Pobble who has no toes, the new Vestments, the two old Bachelors, the Owl, and the Pussycat. The Ahkond of Swat. Who, or why, or which, or what, is the Ahkond of Swat? Is he tall, or short, or dark, or fair? Does he sit on a stool, or sofa, or chair, or squat? The Ahkond of Swat. Is he wise or foolish, young or old? Does he drink his soup and his coffee cold, or hot? The Ahkond of Swat. Does he sing or whistle, jabber or talk? And when riding abroad, does he gallop or walk, or trot? The Ahkond of Swat. Does he wear a turban, a fez, or a hat? Does he sleep on a mattress, a bed, or a mat, or a cot? The Ahkond of Swat. When he writes a copy in round-hand size, does he cross his T's and finish his I's with a dot? The Ahkond of Swat. Can he write a letter concisely clear, without a speck or a smudge or smear, or a blot? The Ahkond of Swat. Do his people like him extremely well, or do they, whenever they can, rebel, or plot, at the Ahkond of Swat? If he catches them then, either old or young, does he have them chopped in pieces, or hung, or shot? The Ahkond of Swat. Do his people prig in the lanes or park, or even at times when days are dark, garrot? Oh, the Ahkond of Swat. Does he study the wants of his own dominion, or doesn't he care for public opinion? A jot? The Ahkond of Swat. To amuse his mind, do his people show him pictures, or anyone's last new poem, or what? For the Ahkond of Swat. At night, if he suddenly screams and wakes, do they bring him only a few small cakes, or a lot? For the Ahkond of Swat. Does he live on turnips, tea, or tripe? Does he like his shawl to be marked with a stripe, or a dot? The Ahkond of Swat. Does he like to lie on his back in a boat, like the lady who lived in that isle remote, Shalott? The Ahkond of Swat. Is he quiet, or always making a fuss? Is his steward a Swiss, or a Swede, or a Russ, or a Scot? The Ahkond of Swat. Does he like to sit by the calm blue wave, or to sleep and snore in a dark green cave, or a grot? The Ahkond of Swat. Does he drink small beer from a silver jug, or a bowl, or a glass, or a cup, or a mug, or a pot? The Ahkond of Swat. Does he beat his wife with a gold-topped pipe when she lets the gooseberries grow too ripe, or rot? The Ahkond of Swat. Does he bear a white tie when he dines with his friends, and tie it neat in a bow with ends, or a knot? The Ahkond of Swat. Does he like a new cream and hate mince pies? When he looks at the sun, does he wink his eyes, or not? The Ahkond of Swat. Does he teach his subjects to roast and bake? Does he sail about on an inland lake, in a yacht? the Ahkond of Swat? Someone, or nobody knows, I wot, who or which or why or what is the Ahkond of Swat. The Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. On the coast of Coromandel, where the early pumpkins blow, in the middle of the woods lived the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. 2 old chairs and half a candle, 1 old jug without a handle, these were all his worldly goods, in the middle of the woods, these were all the worldly goods of the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, of the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. Once among the bong trees walking, where the early pumpkins blow, to a little heap of stones came the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. There he heard a lady talking to some milk-white hens of Dorking. "'Tis the Lady Jingly Jones, on that little heap of stones sits the Lady Jingly Jones," said the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, said the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. Lady Jingly, sitting where the pumpkins blow, will you come and be my wife?" said the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. "I am tired of living singly, on this coast so wild and shingly. I'm a-weary of my life, if you'll come and be my wife, quite serene would be my life," said the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, said the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. "On this coast of Coromandel, shrimps and watercresses grow, prawns are plentiful and cheap," said the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. "You shall have my chairs and candle, and my jug without a handle. Gaze upon the rolling deep, fish is plentiful and cheap, as the sea, my love, is deep," said the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, said the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. Lady Jongly answered sadly, and her tears began to flow. "Your proposal comes too late, Mr. Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. I would be your wife most gladly," here she twirled her fingers madly, "but in England I've a mate. Yes, you've asked me far too late, for in England I've a mate, Mr. Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, Mr. Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. Mr. Jones, his name is Handel Jones, Esquire and Company, Dorking fowls delights to send, Mr. Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. Keep, oh keep your chairs and candle, and your jug without a handle, I can merely be your friend. Should my Jones more Dorkings send, I will give you 3, my friend, Mr. Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, Mr. Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. Though you've such a tiny body, and your head so large doth grow, though your hat may blow away, Mr. Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, though you're such a haughty dotty, yet I wish that I could modify the words I need must say. Will you please to go away? That is all I have to say, Mr. Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, Mr. Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. Down the slippery slopes of myrtle, where the early pumpkins blow, to the calm and silent sea fled the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. There, beyond the Bay of Gurtle, lay a large and lively turtle. "You're the cove," he said for me, "on your back beyond the sea, turtle, you shall carry me," said the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, said the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. Through the silent, roaring ocean did the turtle swiftly go. Holding fast upon his shell rode the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. With a sad primeval motion towards the sunset isles of Boshen, still the turtle bore him well, holding fast upon his shell. "Lady Jingly Jones, farewell!" sang the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, sang the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. From the coast of Coromandel did that lady never go. On that heap of stones she mourns for the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. On that coast of Coromandel, in his jug without a handle, still she weeps and daily moans on the little heap of stones. To her Dorking hens she moans for the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo, for the Yonghy-Bonghy-Bo. The Jumblies. They went to sea in a sieve, they said, in a sieve they went to sea, in spite of all their friends could say, on a winter's morn, on a stormy day, in a sieve they went to sea. And when the sieve turned round and round, and every one cried, "You'll all be drowned," they called aloud, "Our sieve ain't big, but we don't care a button, we don't care a fig, in a sieve we'll go to sea." Far and few are the lands where the Jumblies live. Their heads are green and their hands are blue, and they went to sea in a sieve. They sailed away in a sieve, they did, in a sieve they sailed so fast. with only a beautiful pea-green veil tied with a ribbon by way of a sail to a small tobacco-pipe mast. And everyone said who saw them go, "Oh, won't they soon be upset, you know? For the sky is dark and the voyage is long, and happen what may, it's extremely wrong in a sieve to sail so fast. Far and few are the lands where the Jumblies live. Their heads are green and their hands are blue, and they went to sea in a sieve." The water it soon came in, it did, the water it soon came in. So, to keep them dry, they wrapped their feet in a pinky paper all folded neat, and they fastened it down with a pin. And they passed the night in a crockery jar, and each of them said, "How wise we are! Though the sky be dark and the voyage be long, yet we never can think we were rash or wrong, while round in our sieve we spin." Far and few are the lands where the Jumblies live. Their heads are green and their hands are blue, and they went to sea in a sieve. And all night long they sailed away, and when the sun went down, they whistled and warbled a moony song to the echoing sound of a coppery gong in the shade of the mountains brown. O Timballoo, how happy we are when we live in a sieve and a crockery jar, and all night long in the moonlight pale we sail away with a pea-green sail in the shade of the mountains brown. Far and few are the lands where the Jumblies live. Their heads are green and their hands are blue, and they went to sea in a sieve. They sailed to the western sea, they did, to a land all covered with trees. And they bought an owl and a useful cart, and a pound of rice and a cranberry tart, and a hive of silvery bees. And they bought a pig, and some green jackdaws, and a lovely monkey with lollipop paws, and 40 bottles of Ringbo Ree, and no end of Stilton cheese. Far and few are the lands where the Jumblies live. Their heads are green, and their hands are blue, and they went to sea in a sieve. And in 20 years they all came back, in 20 years or more, and every one said, "How tall they've grown! For they've been to the lakes and the torrible zone, and the hills of the Chankly Bore." And they drank their health, and gave them a feast of dumplings made of beautiful yeast. And every one said, "If we only live, we too will go to sea in a sieve, to the hills of the Chankly Bore." Far and few are the lands where the Jumblies live. Their heads are green, and their hands are blue, and they went to sea in a sieve. The Pobble Who Has No Toes. The Pobble who has no toes had once as many as we. When they said, "Some day you may lose them all," he replied, "Fish fiddle-dee-dee." And his Aunt Jobiska made him drink lavender water tinged with pink, for she said, "The world in general knows there's nothing so good for a Pobble's toes." The Pobble who has no toes swam across the Bristol Channel, but before he set out he wrapped his nose in a piece of scarlet flannel. For his Aunt Jobiska said no harm can come to his toes if his nose is warm, and it's perfectly known that a Pobble's toes are safe, provided he minds his nose. The Pobble swam fast and well, and when boats or ships came near him, he tinkledy-blinkledy-winkled a bell, so that all the world could hear him, and all the sailors and admirals cried, when they saw him nearing the farther side, "He has gone to fish for his Aunt Jobiska's runcible cat with crimson whiskers." But before he touched the shore of the Bristol Channel, a sea-green porpoise carried away his wrapper of scarlet flannel. And when he came to observe his feet, formerly garnished with toes so neat, his face at once became forlorn, on perceiving that all his toes were gone. And nobody ever knew, from that dark day to the present, whoso had taken the Pobble's toes, in a manner so far from pleasant. Whether the shrimps or crawfish grey or crafty mermaids stole them away, nobody knew, and nobody knows how the Pobble was robbed of his twice 5 toes. The Pobble who has no toes was placed in a friendly bark, and they rowed him back and carried him up to his Aunt Jobiska's park. And she made him a feast at his earnest wish of eggs and buttercups fried with fish. And she said, "It's a fact the whole world knows that Pobbles are happier without their toes." The New Vestments. There lived an old man in the kingdom of Tess who invented a purely original dress, and when it was perfectly made and complete, he opened the door and walked into the street. By way of a hat he'd a loaf of brown bread, in the middle of which he inserted his head. His shirt was made up of no end of dead mice, the warmth of whose skin was quite fluffy and nice. His drawers were of rabbit skins, so were his shoes, his stockings were skins, but it was not known whose. His waistcoat and trousers were made of pork chops, his buttons were jujubes and chocolate drops. His coat was all pancakes with jam for a border, and a girdle of biscuits to keep it in order. And he wore over all, as a screen from bad weather, a cloak of green cabbage leaves stitched all together. He had walked a short way, when he heard a great noise of all sorts of bisticles, birdlings, and boys. And from every long street and dark lane in the town, beasts, birdies, and boys in a tumult rushed down. 2 cows and a calf ate his cabbage-leaf cloak, 4 apes seized his girdle, which vanished like smoke. 3 kids ate up half of his pancakey coat, and the tails were devoured by an ancient he-goat. An army of dogs in a twinkling tore up his pork waistcoat and trousers to give to their puppies, and while they were growling and mumbling the chops, 10 boys prigged the jujubes and chocolate drops. He tried to run back to his house, but in vain, for scores of fat pigs came again and again. They rushed out of stables and hovels and doors, they tore off his stockings, his shoes, and his drawers. And now from the housetops with screechings descend striped, spotted, white, black, and grey cats without end. They jumped on his shoulders and knocked off his hat. When crows, ducks, and hens made a mincemeat of that, they speedily flew at his sleeves in a trice, and utterly tore up his shirt of dead mice. They swallowed the last of his shirt with a squall, whereon he ran home, with no clothes on at all. And he said to himself, as he bolted the door, "I will not wear a similar dress any more, any more, any more, any more, never more." The 2 Old Bachelors. 2 old bachelors were living in one house. One caught a muffin, the other caught a mouse. Said he who caught the muffin to him who caught the mouse, "This happens just in time, for we've nothing in the house, save a tiny slice of lemon and a teaspoonful of honey, and what to do for dinner, since we haven't any money? And what can we expect if we haven't any dinner, but to lose our teeth and eyelashes, and keep on growing thinner?" Said he who caught the mouse to him who caught the muffin, "We might cook this little mouse, if we only had some stuffin'. If we had but sage and onions, we could do extremely well, but how to get that stuffin' it is difficult to tell." And then those 2 old bachelors ran quickly to the town, and asked for sage and onions as they wandered up and down. They borrowed 2 large onions, but no sage was to be found in the shops or in the market, or in all the gardens round. But some one said, "A hill there is, a little to the north, and to its perpendicular top a narrow way leads forth. And there among the rugged rocks abides an ancient sage, an earnest man, who reads all day a most perplexing page. Climb up and seize him by the toes, all studious as he sits, and pull him down and chop him into endless little bits. Then mix him with your onion, cut up likewise into scraps, and your stuffin' will be ready, and very good, perhaps." And then those 2 old bachelors, without loss of time, the nearly perpendicular crags at once began to climb. And at the top, among the rocks, all seated in a nook, they saw that sage a-reading of a most enormous book. "You earnest sage," aloud they cried, "your book you've read enough in, we wish to chop you into bits, and mix you into stuffin'." But that old sage looked calmly up, and with his awful book, at those 2 bachelors' bald heads a certain aim he took. And over crag and precipice they rolled promiscuous down. At once they rolled, and never stopped in lane or field or town. And when they reached their house, they found, besides their want of stuffin', the mouse had fled, and previously had eaten up the muffin. They left their house in silence by the once convivial door, and from that hour these bachelors were never heard of more. The Owl and the Pussy-Cat. The Owl and the Pussy-Cat went to sea in a beautiful pea-green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money, wrapped up in a 5-pound note. The Owl looked up to the stars above, and sang to a small guitar, "O lovely pussy, O pussy, my love, what a beautiful pussy you are, you are, you are, what a beautiful pussy you are." Pussy said to the Owl, "You elegant fowl, how charmingly sweet you sing! O let us be married, too long we have tarried, but what shall we do for a ring?" They sailed away for a year and a day to the land where the bong tree grows, and there in the wood a piggy-wig stood, with a ring at the end of his nose, his nose, his nose, with a ring at the end of his nose. "Dear pig, are you willing to sell for 1 shilling your ring?" said the piggy. "I will." So they took it away, and were married next day by the turkey who lives on the hill. They dined on mince and slices of quince, which they ate with a runcible spoon, and hand in hand on the edge of the sand they danced by the light of the moon, the moon, the moon, they danced by the light of the moon. End of Part 3. Part 4 of Silly Verses, Selections from Shores, Carroll, Lear, and Gilbert. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Silly Verses, Selections from Shores, Carroll, Lear, and Gilbert, by Various. Part 4. W. S. Gilbert. The Played-Out Humorist, The Practical Joker, To Phoebe, To the Terrestrial Globe, Etiquette, The Mighty Must, The Yarn of the Nancy Bell, Ferdinando and Elvira, Gentle Alice Brown, The Story of Prince Agib, Sir Guy the Crusader, Sing for the Garish Eye. The Played-Out Humorist. Quixotic is his enterprise, and hopeless his adventure is, who seeks for jocularities that haven't yet been said. The world has joked incessantly for over 50 centuries, and every joke that's possible has long ago been made. I started as a humorist with lots of mental fizziness, but humor is a drug which it's the fashion to abuse. For my stock in trade, my fixtures, and the goodwill of the business, no reasonable offer I am likely to refuse. And if anybody choose, he may circulate the news that no reasonable offer I am likely to refuse. Oh, happy was that humorist, the first that made a pun at all, who, when a joke occurred to him, however poor and mean, was absolutely certain that it never had been done at all. How popular at dinners must that humorist have been! Oh, the days when some stepfather for a query held a handle out! The doormat from the scraper, is it distant very far? And when no one knew where Moses was, when Aaron put the candle out, and no one had discovered that a door could be ajar. But your modern hearers are, in their taste particular, and they sneer if you inform them that a door can be ajar. In search of quip and quiddity, I've sat all day alone, apart. And all that I could hit on as a problem was to find analogy between a scrag of mutton and a bony part, which offers slight employment to the speculative mind. For you cannot call it very good, however great your charity. It's not the sort of humor that is greeted with a shout. And I've come to the conclusion that my mine of jocularity in present Anno Domini is worked completely out. Though the notion you may scout, I can prove beyond a doubt that my mine of jocularity is worked completely out. The Practical Joker. Oh, what a find of joy jocund lies hid in harmless hoaxes! What keen enjoyment springs from cheap and simple things! What deep delight from sources trite inventive humour coaxes, that pain and trouble brew for every one but you! Gunpowder placed inside its waist improves a mild Havana, its unexpected flash burns eyebrows and moustache. When people dine, no kind of wine beats Ipecacuanha, but common sense suggests you keep it for your guests. Then naught annoys the organ boys like throwing red-hot coppers, and much amusement bides in common butter slides, and stringy snares across the stairs cause unexpected croppers. Coal scuttles, recollect, produce the same effect. A man possessed of common sense need not invest at great expense. It does not call for pocket deep, these jokes are all extremely cheap. If you commence with 18 pence, it's all you'll have to pay, you may command a pleasant and a most instructive day. A good spring gun breeds endless fun, and makes men jump like rockets, and turnip heads on posts make very decent ghosts. Then hornets sting like anything when placed in waistcoat pockets. Burnt cork and walnut juice are not without their use. No fun compares with easy chairs whose seats are stuffed with needles. Live shrimps their patience tax when put down people's backs. Surprising, too, what one can do with a pint of fat black beetles. And treacle on a chair will make a Quaker swear. Then sharp tin tacks and pocket squirts, and cobbler's wax for ladies' skirts, and slimy slugs on bedroom floors, and water jugs on open doors. Prepared with these cheap properties, amusing tricks to play upon a friend, a man may spend a most delightful day. To Phoebe. Gentle, modest little flower, sweet epitome of May, love me but for half an hour, love me, little Fay. Sentences so fiercely flaming in your tiny shell-like ear, I should always be exclaiming if I loved you, Phoebe dear. Smiles that thrill from any distance shed upon me while I sing. Please ecstaticize existence, love me, O thou fairy thing. Words like these, outpouring sadly, you'll perpetually hear, if I loved you fondly, madly, but I do not, Phoebe dear. To the Terrestrial Globe, by a Miserable Wretch. Roll on, thou ball, roll on, through pathless realms of space, roll on. What though I'm in a sorry case? What though I cannot meet my bills? What though I suffer toothache's ills? What though I swallow countless pills? Never you mind, roll on. Roll on, thou ball, roll on, through seas of inky air, roll on. It's true I've got no shirts to wear, it's true my butcher's bill is due, it's true my prospects all look blue, but don't let that unsettle you, never you mind, roll on. It rolls on. Etiquette. The Ballyshannon foundered off the coast of Caribou, and down in fathoms many went the captain and the crew. Down went the owners, greedy men whom hope of gain allured, and dry the starting tier, for they were heavily insured. Besides the captain and the mate, the owners and the crew, the passengers were also drowned, excepting only two. Young Peter Grey, who tasted teas for Baker, Croup & Co., and Summers, who from eastern shores imported indigo. These passengers, by reason of their clinging to a mast, upon a desert island, were eventually cast. They hunted for their meals, as Alexander Selkirk used, but they couldn't chat together, they had not been introduced. For Peter Grey, and Summers too, though certainly in trade, were properly particular about the friends they made. And somehow thus they settled it, without a word of mouth, that Grey should take the northern half, while Summers took the south. On Peter's portion oysters grew, a delicacy rare, but oysters were a delicacy Peter couldn't bear. On Summer's side was turtle, on the shingle lying thick, which Summers couldn't eat, because it always made him sick. Gray gnashed his teeth with envy as he saw a mighty store of turtle unmolested on his fellow creature's shore. The oysters at his feet aside impatiently he shoved, for turtle and his mother were the only things he loved. And Summers sighed in sorrow as he settled in the south, for the thought of Peter's oysters brought the water to his mouth. He longed to lay him down upon the shelly bed and stuff. He had often eaten oysters, but had never had enough. How they wished an introduction to each other they had had when on board the Ballyshannon, and it drove them nearly mad. To think how very friendly with each other they might get, if it wasn't for the arbitrary rule of etiquette. One day, when out a-hunting for the mus ridiculus, Gray overheard his fellow-man soliloquizing thus: "I wonder how the playmates of my youth are getting on, McConnell, S.B. Walters, Paddy Byles, and Robin Son." These simple words made Peter as delighted as could be. Old chummies at the Charterhouse were Robinson and he. He walked straight up to Summers, then he turned extremely red, hesitated, hummed and hawed a bit, then cleared his throat and said: "I beg your pardon, pray forgive me if I seem too bold, but you have breathed a name I knew familiarly of old. You spoke aloud of Robinson. I happened to be by. You know him? Yes, extremely well. Allow me, so do I." It was enough. They felt they could more pleasantly get on, for, the magic of the fact, they each knew Robinson. And Mr. Summers' turtle was at Peter's service quite, and Mr. Summers punished Peter's oyster-beds all night. They soon became like brothers from community of wrongs. They wrote each other little odes and sang each other songs. They told each other anecdotes disparaging their wives. On several occasions, too, they saved each other's lives. They felt quite melancholy when they parted for the night, and got up in the morning soon as ever it was light. Each other's pleasant company they reckoned so upon, and all because it happened that they both knew Robinson. They lived for many years on that inhospitable shore, and day by day they learned to love each other more and more. At last, to their astonishment, on getting up one day, they saw a frigate anchored in the offing of the bay. To Peter an idea occurred: "Suppose we cross the main? So good an opportunity may not be found again." And Summers thought a minute, then ejaculated, "Done! I wonder how my business in the city's getting on." "But stay," said Mr. Peter, "when in England, as you know, I earned a living tasting teas for Baker, Croup & Co. I may be superseded, my employers think me dead." "Then come with me," said Summers, "and taste indigo instead." But all their plans were scattered in a moment when they found the vessel was a convict ship from Portland outward bound. When a boat came off to fetch them, though they felt it very kind, to go on board they firmly but respectfully declined. As both the happy settlers roared with laughter at the joke, they recognized a gentlemanly fellow pulling stroke. 'Twas Robinson, a convict in an unbecoming frock, condemned to 7 years for misappropriating stock. They laughed no more, for Summers thought he had been rather rash in knowing one whose friends had misappropriated cash, and Peter thought a foolish tack he must have gone upon in making the acquaintance of a friend of Robinson. At first they didn't quarrel very openly, I've heard. They nodded when they met, and now and then exchanged a word. The word grew rare, and rarer still the nodding of the head, and when they meet each other now, they cut each other dead. To allocate the island they agreed by word of mouth, and Peter takes the north again, and Summers takes the south. And Peter has the oysters, which he hates, in layers thick, and Summers has the turtle. Turtle always makes him sick. The Mighty Must. Come, mighty must, inevitable shall, in thee I trust. Time weaves my coronal, go mocking is, go disappointing was. That I am this, ye are the cursed cause, yet humble second shall be first, I ween, and dead and buried be the cursed has been. O weak might be, O may, might, could, would, should, how powerless ye for evil or for good. In every sense your moods I cheerless call, whate'er your tense ye are imperfect all. Ye have deceived the trust I've shown in ye, away the mighty must alone shall be. The Yarn of the Nancy Bell. 'Twas on the shores that round our coast from Deal to Ramsgate span, that I found alone on a piece of stone an elderly naval man. His hair was weedy, his beard was long, and weedy and long was he, and I heard this wight on the shore recite, in a singular minor key, "Oh, I am a cook, and the captain bold, and the mate of the Nancy brig, and a boatswain tight, and a midshipmite, and the crew of the captain's gig." And he shook his fists and tore his hair, till I really felt afraid, for I couldn't help thinking the man had been drinking, and so I simply said, "O elderly man, it's little I know of the duties of men of the sea, and I'll eat my hand if I understand how you can possibly be at once a cook, and a captain bold, and the mate of the Nancy brig, and a boatswain tight, and a midshipmite, and the crew of the captain's gig." Then he gave a hitch to his trousers, which is a trick all seamen larn, and having got rid of a thumping quid, he spun this painful yarn. 'Twas in the good ship Nancy Bell that we sailed to the Indian Sea, and there on a reef we come to grief, which has often occurred to me. And pretty nigh all the crew was drowned, there was 77 a soul, and only 10 of the Nancy's men said here to the muster roll. There was me and the cook and the captain bold, and the mate of the Nancy brig, and the boatswain tight, and a midshipmite, and the crew of the captain's gig. For a month we'd neither wittles nor drink, till a hungry we did feel, so we drawed a lot, and accordingly shot the captain for our meal. The next lot fell to the Nancy's mate, and a delicate dish he made. Then our appetite with the midshipmite we 7 survivors stayed. And then we murdered the boatswain tight, and he much resembled pig. Then we whittled free, did the cook and me, on the crew of the captain's gig. Then only the cook and me was left, and the delicate question, which of us 2 goes to the kettle, arose, and we argued it out as sich. For I loved that cook as a brother I did, and the cook he worshipped me. But we'd both be blowed if we'd either be stowed in the other chap's hold, you see. "I'll be eat if you dines off me," says Tom. "Yes, that," says I, "you'll be." "I'm boiled if I die, my friend," quoth I, "and exactly so," quoth he. Says he, "Dear James, to murder me were a foolish thing to do, for don't you see that you can't cook me, while I can and will cook you?" So he boils the water, and takes the salt and pepper and portions true, which he never forgot, and some chopped shallot, and some sage and parsley too. "Come here," says he, with a proper pride, which his smiling features tell, "'twill soothing be if I let you see how extremely nice you'll smell." And he stirred it round and round and round, and he sniffed at the foaming froth, when I ups with his heels and smothers his squeals in the scum of the boiling broth. And I eat that cook in a week or less, and, as I eating be the last of his chops, why I almost drops, for a vessel in sight I see. And I never larf, and I never smile, and I never lark or play, but sit and croak, and a single joke I have, which is to say, "Oh, I am a cook, and a captain bold, and a mate of the Nancy brig, and a boatswain tight, and a midshipmite, and the crew of the captain's gig." Ferdinando and Elvira, or The Gentle Pieman. Part I. At a pleasant evening party I had taken down to supper one woman I will call Elvira, and we talked of love and Tupper. Mr. Tupper and the poets, very lightly with them dealing, for I've always been distinguished for a strong poetic feeling. Then we let off paper crackers, each of which contained a motto, and she listened while I read them, till her mother told her not to. Then she whispered, "To the ballroom we had better, dear, be walking. If we stop down here much longer, many people will be talking." There were noblemen in coronets and military cousins. There were captains by the hundreds, there were baronets by dozens. Yet she heeded not their offers, but dismissed them with a blessing. Then she let down all her back hair, which had taken long in pressing. Then she had convulsive sobbings in her agitated throttle. Then she wiped her pretty eyes, and smelt her pretty smelling bottle. So I whispered, "Dear Elvira, say, what can the matter be with you? Does anything you've eaten, darling Popsy, disagree with you?" But spite of all I said, her sobs grew more and more distressing, and she tore her pretty back hair, which had taken long in dressing. Then she gazed upon the carpet, at the ceiling, then above me, and she whispered, "Ferdinando, do you really, really love me?" "Love you," said I, then I sighed, and then I gazed upon her sweetly, for I think I do this sort of thing particularly neatly. Send me to the Arctic regions, or illimitable azure, on a scientific goose chase with my coxswain or my glacier. Tell me whither I may hie me, tell me, dear one, that I may know, is it up the highest Andes, down a horrible volcano? But she said, "It isn't polar bears or hot volcanic grottos, only find out who it is that writes these lovely cracker mottos." Part 2. Tell me, Henry Wadsworth, Alfred Poet Close, or Mr. Tupper, do you write the bon ton mottos my Elvira pulls at supper? But Henry Wadsworth smiled and said he had not had that honor, and Alfred, too, disclaimed the words that told so much upon her. Mr. Martin Tupper, Poet Close, I beg of you inform us, but my question seemed to throw them both into a rage enormous. Mr. Close expressed a wish that he could only get a nigh to me, and Mr. Martin Tupper sent the following reply to me: "A fool is bent upon a twig, but wise men dread a bandit," which I know was very clever, but I didn't understand it. 7 weary years I wandered, Patagonia, China, Norway, till at last I sank exhausted at a pastry cook his doorway. There were fuchsias and geraniums and daffodils and myrtle, so I entered, and I ordered half a basin of mock turtle. He was plump and he was chubby, he was smooth and he was rosy, and his little wife was pretty and particularly cozy. And he chirped and sang and skipped about and laughed with laughter hearty. He was wonderfully active, for so very stout a party. And I said, "O gentle pieman, why so very, very merry? Is it purity of conscience, or your 1 and 7 sherry?" But he answered, "I'm so happy, no profession could be dearer. If I'm not humming tra-la-la, I'm singing tirrer-tirrer. First I go and make the patties, and the puddings, and the jellies. Then I make a sugar bird-cage, which upon a table swell is. Then I polish all the silver, which a supper-table lacquers. Then I write the pretty mottos which you find inside the crackers." "Found at last!" I madly shouted. "Gentle pieman, you astound me." Then I waved the turtle soup enthusiastically around me. And I shouted and I danced until he'd quite a crowd around him, and I rushed away exclaiming, "I have found him, I have found him." And I heard the gentle pieman in the road behind me trilling, "Tira-lira, stop him, tra-la-la, the soup's a shilling." But until I reached Elvira's home I never, never waited, and Elvira to her Ferdinands irrevocably mated. Gentle Alice Brown. It was a robber's daughter, and her name was Alice Brown. Her father was the terror of a small Italian town. Her mother was a foolish, weak, but amiable old thing, and it isn't to her parents that I'm going for to sing. As Alice was a-sitting at her window-sill one day, a beautiful young gentleman he chanced to pass that way. She cast her eyes upon him, and he looked so good and true that she thought, "I could be happy with a gentleman like you." And every morning past her house that cream of gentleman, she knew she might expect him at 10:15. A sorter in the custom-house it was his daily road. The custom-house was 15 minutes' walk from her abode. But Alice was a pious girl who knew it wasn't wise to look at strange young sorters with expressive purple eyes. So she sought the village priest to whom her family confessed, the priest by whom their little sins were carefully assessed. "O holy father," Alice said, "'twould grieve you, would it not, to discover that I was a most disreputable lot? Of all unhappy sinners, I'm the most unhappy one." The padre said, "Whatever have you been, and gone, and done?" "I have helped mamma to steal a little kitty from its dad. I've assisted dear papa in cutting up a little lad. I've planned a little burglary and forged a little check, and slain a little baby for the coral on its neck." The worthy pastor heaved a sigh and dropped a silent tear, and said, "You mustn't judge yourself too heavily, my dear. It's wrong to murder babies, little corals for to fleece, but sins like these one expiates at half a crown apiece. Girls will be girls, you're very young and flighty in your mind. Old heads upon young shoulders we must not expect to find. We mustn't be too hard upon these little girlish tricks. Let's see, 5 crimes at half a crown, exactly 12 and 6. "Oh, father," little Alice cried, "your kindness makes me weep. You do these little things for me so singularly cheap. Your thoughtful liberality I never can forget, but oh, there is another crime I haven't mentioned yet. A pleasant-looking gentleman with pretty purple eyes I've noticed at my window as I've sat a-catching flies. He passes by it every day as certain as can be. I blush to say I've winked at him, and he has winked at me." "For shame!" said Father Paul, "my erring daughter, on my word, this is the most distressing news that I have ever heard." "Why, naughty girl, your excellent papa has pledged your hand to a promising young robber, the lieutenant of his band. This dreadful piece of news will pain your worthy parents so. They are the most remunerative customers I know. For many, many years they've kept starvation from my doors. I never knew so criminal a family as yours. The common country folk in this insipid neighborhood have nothing to confess, they're so ridiculously good. And if you marry any one respectable at all, why, you'll reform, and what will then become of Father Paul?" The worthy priest, he up and drew his cowl upon his crown, and started off in haste to tell the news to Robber Brown. To tell him how his daughter, who was now for marriage fit, had winked upon a sorter, who reciprocated it. Good Robber Brown, he muffled up his anger pretty well. He said, "I have a notion, and that notion I will tell. I will nab this gay young sorter, terrify him into fits, and get my gentle wife to chop him into little bits. I've studied human nature, and I know a thing or two. Though a girl may fondly love a living gent, as many do, a feeling of disgust upon her senses there will fall when she looks upon his body chopped particularly small." He traced that gallant sorter to a still suburban square. He watched his opportunity and seized him unaware. He took a life-preserver and he hit him on the head, and Mrs. Brown dissected him before she went to bed. And pretty little Alice grew more settled in her mind. She never more was guilty of a weakness of the kind, until at length good Robber Brown bestowed her pretty hand on the promising young robber, the lieutenant of his band. The Story of Prince Agib. Strike the concertina's melancholy string, blow the spirit-stirring harp like anything. Let the piano's martial blast rouse the echoes of the past, for of Agib, Prince of Tartary, I sing. Of Agib, who, amid Tartaric scenes, wrote a lot of ballet music in his teens. His gentle spirit rolls in the melody of souls, which is pretty, but I don't know what it means. Of Agib, who could readily, at sight, strum a march upon the loud theodolite, he would diligently play on the zoetrope all day, and blow the gay pantechnicon all night. One winter, I am shaky in my dates, came 2 starving Tartar minstrels to his gates. O Allah be obeyed, how infernally they played! I remember that they called themselves the Quaits. Oh, that day of sorrow, misery, and rage I shall carry to the catacombs of age. photographically lined on the tablet of my mind, when a yesterday has faded from its page. Alas, Prince Agib went and asked them in, gave them beer and eggs and sweets and scent and tin, and when, as snobs would say, they had put it all away, he requested them to tune up and begin. Though its icy horror chill you to the core, I will tell you what I never told before, the consequences true of that awful interview, for I listened at the keyhole in the door. They played him a sonata, let me see, medulla oblongata, key of G. Then they began to sing that extremely lovely thing, Scheherazando mamma topo pi. He gave them money, more than they could count, sent from a most ingenious little fount, more beer in little kegs, many dozen hard-boiled eggs, and goodies to a fabulous amount. Now follows the dim horror of my tale, and I feel I'm growing gradually pale, for even at this day, though its sting has passed away, when I venture to remember it, I quail. The elder of the brothers gave a squeal, all overish it made me for to feel. "O Prince," he says he, "if a prince indeed you be, I've a mystery I'm going to reveal. Oh, listen, if you'd shun a horrid death, to what the gent who's speaking to you saith. No quaits in truth are we, as you fancy that we be, for ter remble I am Alec, this is Beth." Said Agib, "O accursed of your kind, I have heard that you are men of evil mind." Beth gave a fearful shriek, but before he'd time to speak, I was mercilessly collared from behind. In number 10 or 12, or even more, they fastened me full length upon the floor. On my face extended flat, I was walloped with a cat, for listening at the keyhole of a door. Oh, the horror of that agonizing thrill! I can feel the place in frosty weather still. For a week from 10 to 4 I was fastened to the floor, while a mercenary whopped me with a will. They branded me, and broke me on a wheel, and they left me in an hospital to heal, and upon my solemn word I have never heard what those Tartars had determined to reveal. But that day of sorrow, misery, and rage I shall carry to the catacombs of age, photographically lined on the tablet of my mind, when a yesterday has faded from its page. Sir Guy the Crusader. Sir Guy was a doughty crusader, a muscular knight, ever ready to fight, a very determined invader, and Dicky de Lion's delight. Lenore was a Saracen maiden, brunette, statuesque, the reverse of grotesque. Her pa was a bagman from Aden, her mother she played in burlesque. A coryphée, pretty and loyal, in amber and red, the ballet she led. Her mother performed at the Royal, Lenore at the Saracen's Head. Of face and of figure majestic, she dazzled the cits, ecstaticized pits. Her troubles were only domestic, but drove her half out of her wits. Her father incessantly lashed her. On water and bread she was grudgingly fed. Whenever her father he thrashed her, her mother sat down on her head. Guy saw her, and loved her with reason, for beauty so bright sent him mad with delight. He purchased a stall for the season, and sat in it every night. His views were exceedingly proper. He wanted to wed, so he called at her shed, and saw her progenitor whopper, her mother sit down on her head. "So pretty," said he, "and so trusting, you brute of a dad, you unprincipled cad, your conduct is really disgusting. Come, now admit it's too bad. You're a turbaned old Turk and malignant. Your daughter Lenore I intensely adore, and I cannot help feeling indignant, a fact that I hinted before. To see a fond father employing a deuce of a knout, for to bang her about to a sensitive lover's annoying," said the bagman, "Crusader, get out." Says Guy, "Shall a warrior laden with a big spiky knob sit in peace on his cob, while a beautiful Saracen maiden is whopped by a Saracen snob? To London I'll go from my charmer," which he did with his lute, 7 hats, and a flute, and was nabbed for his Sydenham's armour at Mr. Ben Samuel's suit. Sir Guy he was lodged in the Compter, her pa in a rage died, don't know his age, his daughter she married the prompter, grew bulky and quitted the stage. Sing for the Garish Eye. Sing for the garish eye, when moonless brandlings cling, let the frottering crooner cry, and the brattled sapster sing. For never and never again will the tottering beachlings play, for brattest rackers are singing aloud, and the throngers croon in May. The racking globe unstrung in the frittering light of a moon that knows no day, of a day that knows no night. Diving away in the crowd of sparkling frets and spray, the brattest rackers are singing aloud, and the throngers croon in May. Hasten, O hatful blue, blue of the shimmering brow, hasten the deed to do that shall rottle the welkin now. For never again shall a cloud out-thribble the babbling day, when brattest rackers are singing aloud, and the throngers croon in May. End of Part 4. End of Silly Verses, selections from Shores, Carroll, Lear, and Gilbert, by Various.